The agenda this week learned how the history of Black settlers in one Ontario town was almost wiped out, considered Canada's approach to vaccine diplomacy, assessed why Western nations don't try to export democracy like they once did, and examined Uganda's efforts in the past 50 years at democratic government. The agenda's week in review begins with some gentle advice for troubled times from psychotherapist and author Julia Samuel.
Why is change so difficult for so many of us?
Everybody that's come through my door, they know that life is change and they kind of welcome the change, but they don't want to do the change themselves that goes with it. Do you know what I mean? So the first arrow is the bad news. So you've broken up with your partner, or you've lost your job, or you've got a health diagnosis, or you recognize you're in a pandemic. But we are born adaptive, but we fear the not knowing of the new versions of ourselves. So we kind of hold on to, like grim death, the older versions, because we prefer the familiar to the scary unknown. I think one of the biggest things people are finding hard now is not having control and not knowing what on earth is going to happen next, or not being able to make plans.
Well, you've no doubt had a huge litany, a very long list of different ailments come through your doors over the years. I know you've mentioned a few of them here, but if you had to rank them, what are the most serious changes that people are the most afraid of having to undergo?
There are two, in particular. I think the three big ones are your relationship, losing your job, and a health diagnosis. Obviously, your life being threatened is radically the most frightening, because it may mean the end of your life. And all of us live, like, every day we wake up assuming that tomorrow is going to be the same as today. And a diagnosis that you have a life-threatening illness, grief starts at the point of diagnosis, because you kind of plan your death. I think you immediately sort of imagine you're going to die. And so that is very scary, I think.
Does that kind of trepidation happen even when the news is good and not just bad?
You've read my book. I'm very impressed. Yes, because, when you commit to a relationship, you've had this dream ever since you were 8 years old that you're going to commit to somebody and you're going to have this happy future. And then when you actually do it, you realize that in order to live with them and commit to them, you have to give up a whole lot of stuff. You have to give up having, depends on your relationship, but most people have to give up having sex with other people, or you have to do their laundry, or deal with their bad mood. So nothing comes for nothing. And the first arrow is the change, and the second arrow is what we do about the change and how we kind of shift ourselves to reshape ourselves. And those that change, that are most adaptable, are the happiest in life. Those that resist change, get hit by change again when it happens, and it does happen every 7 or 8 years, are the least happy, are the least content.
And do you know why some people are better at it than others?
I think it's partly their upbringing. It might be partly their DNA. I think it's a lot to do with what's been modeled to you about previous losses. Like now, all what I call the change now is a living loss. So all the things that we predicted that we can have, like seeing our friends, making plans, having holidays, they've been taken off the table. And the experience of that is a loss. It's a living loss, and it's experienced like grief. And if you've observed your parents managing those losses and what they do with them, we learn from our parents. And so if you've seen parents that are pretty adaptable and robust, then you tend to be as well.
Why do you think that we know so little about Colonel Price, the United Empire loyalist, after whom Priceville was named?
Because he was a Black United Empire loyalist. And largely, by 1811, the names of Black United Empire loyalists were largely stricken from the rolls. We have to put ourselves into the mindset of the time. This was still when slavery was legal on the entire North American continent. Colonel Price and many people like him who came to Ontario had made the decision to fight for Great Britain, which made them loyalists. And the land grants that they got were in areas that the white loyalists didn't necessarily want because it was too hard to clean or drain or cut down the forest. We were more than willing to take that. We had worked under similar conditions under enslavement, and that didn't bother us. But again, I'm saying we weren't given socialized information on how to own something. Just taking it over and clearing it up and promising to meet guidelines and stipulations like clearing 5 acres within 3 years or paying off the price of the property within 10 years. Little tricks were played and the property was taken away.
Elisa, I wonder if I could follow up with this. Again, I want you to take us back. The Black community had established itself in Priceville, and then white settlers came into the area. And I wonder if you could just give us some more information about that first contact, how it all went.
Well, there would be several ways in which it would go. The Black families most probably invited the white families into their homes until they could get their own properties cleared and built. The white settlers may have been a little bit jealous of what they were seeing. You know, after all, European immigrants were coming from hard times as well. The Irish came here with the first potato famine. They were under colonization from the British. They had very little themselves. And to see others who were racially not appreciated. I'm trying to be very diplomatic about the way I say this.
I noticed that. That was a very gentle way of putting it.
Yeah. And then there could have been, as Jennifer said, mixed marriages. And so over the course of even 2 generations, we can blend out. And people wouldn't know that we were Black unless they were told. And so in order to not be ashamed of themselves or to take on the guise of a white person, they would shun their Black family.
Jennifer, was it also the case that if you were a white family and you worked the land for the year, it was yours? If you're a Black family, not the case. Is that true?
Absolutely. In actual fact, some of the settlers, the white settlers, targeted land that had already been cleared, that there weren't any deeds, and within a year, because they had land that had actually been prepared for them, essentially, they were able to move in and establish, the community, and as you know, with Priceville, after whites took over the community, the only remnants was the cemetery. And what actually happened was a farmer, Billy Reed, plucked all the gravestones and essentially pitched some of them into a stone pile, floored his stable and his basement with the gravestones. And of course, one gentleman, Stuart Muir, who was an older gentleman in the film, he talked about them using a gravestone as home plate. So, there was no respect for the Black lives that was there before, the Blacks' lives that had done all of this work. There was no value placed on them.
Which countries or regions of the world do you think we are particularly trying to influence with our vaccine diplomacy?
Well, I think quite simply, you have to look at where our foreign aid has gone before. It really is a great predictor of where we want to influence. Now, I do have to point out that most of our kind of contribution is through this COVAX mechanism, as my colleague noted, because I think this is where we think we're going to do most good. So we've really done our job in sort of putting it through the international organizations like the WHO and the COVAX mechanism, which is really the right way to do it. But I think you just have to follow where the money is. Where are we sort of contributing our foreign aid dollars? It's in many developing countries. Of course, Latin America is an important market for us, economically. So we're going to donate there, and certainly parts of East Asia and Africa as well.
Erica, you mentioned the word equity earlier, and I want to follow up on that. Do you believe that Canada either can or should use vaccine diplomacy to, for example, promote gender equity in some countries that don't follow it as closely as perhaps we'd like them to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as I think many people know, the Prime Minister actually made this a key part of his political platform back in 2015 as part of the feminist agenda. But I would argue that gender is much broader than just vaccine diplomacy. But the implications for vaccines to women are really particular. For example, women here at home and globally are more vulnerable in health terms during periods of crisis. And this is particularly true during COVID-19. One of the reasons is that women make up more than 70% of the health workforce and therefore are at greater risk. The second reason is the kind of roles that women play. They often are essential workers, they are PSWs. And as we heard back in March last year, if we can dial the clock back that far, female-dominated service sector jobs were among the first to be affected in the first wave of the pandemic, because many of these jobs were precarious because they're part-time, they lack benefits such as paid sick leave, which is a hotly debated issue right now in Ontario, and job security. So of course, access to vaccines for women is a particularly important issue here at home, but also globally.
Besma, can I hear you on that too?
Yeah, of course, I completely agree. And I think the other aspect of this is that, of course, women's organizations are really grassroots organizations. And what they can do is obviously raise public awareness. I think we have to point out there's still a lot of vaccine skepticism. I mean, it's not just a developing country problem. And I just heard a poll, a YouGov poll that noted that, in France, 48% of people are still very skeptical about even taking the vaccine. So we do need to raise public awareness, public education, and women's organizations, being grassroots organizations, knowing their communities, knowing their families are really important. They help in countering disinformation. So the more we can get these types of grassroots organizations through a bottom-up effort, the better we'll be in terms of getting that kind of vaccine distribution that's needed to really stamp out this virus.
Erica, can I pursue this just one more time? And that is, I want to make sure I got a better understanding of this. I don't think there's anybody in Canada who would say, for example, men ought to get a shot before women, and who cares about equity? Men are more important to society, and therefore, ... No one would take that view in Canada. But there may be places in this world where that is the view. And do you think the government of Canada ought to use vaccine diplomacy to try to stamp that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be really careful that we don't preach to the developing world what may be also issues here at home. And as my colleague expressed, while we wouldn't necessarily suggest that, we've also already seen attempts by men to jump the queue and get vaccines in northern part of Canada as one example. And so I think that the issue is here at home as well. I guess the other issue has to do with trust in institutions, as my colleague alluded to. And so I think it's really important to build capacity for adoption of vaccines, because we can't rest on our laurels. Vaccine hesitancy is here, and part of the reason is trust in institutions who tend to deliver them.
Well, Besma, admittedly, I'm doing a little bit of spitballing here, so help me out if I'm really off base here. But for example, could Canada use vaccine diplomacy if it wanted to mediate in a long-standing dispute, for example, in the Middle East? I'm not sure how, but do you see a role for it in that circumstance?
Well, you have to be really careful with that, frankly. I mean, you don't want to weaponize the vaccine, so to speak. You don't want to make it a overly political tool, even though I think, frankly, it is in many ways. I mean, I don't think really, and I don't see a Canadian example really effectively to be used in the Middle East, for example. But, think about countries like Nepal or Sri Lanka, where you have China and India very much competing for influence in those two countries. They're doing exactly that. And frankly, the leaders of both Sri Lanka and Nepal are smart enough to actually use China and India against each other to get more and more vaccines.
there are places in this world which have fewer objections to the notion of free and fair elections, that part of the democratic equation, but they're not going to give up the notion of religion having an absolutely central part of the story of their country and in the daily life of their country. They are not signing on for gay rights and that kind of thing. These are the parts of the equation they're not going to be a part of, and yet they still want to be thought of as democracies. Discuss.
Well, absolutely. I spent 11 years abroad, and most of that time was actually covering not so much conflict, but faith and religion and faith and politics. If you want a refresher course on the importance of that and how connected they are, think of our friends to the South. For better or for worse, faith and religion are huge parts of American politics, certainly the anti-abortion drive with the Republican Party. But remember, if you think about the setbacks, let's say in Poland right now, a lot of people are focusing on the loss of abortion rights. I couldn't be more pro-choice, but I understand that that's not necessarily an indicator of pure democracy, because look at Ireland. We think of Ireland as a robust democracy, but they banned abortion for decades. Italy took its time. So you can't pick and choose. Democracy is a process, and it doesn't have one particular look. There are many democracies in Africa and the Caribbean, some of which are quite healthy, which are very retrograde on gay rights. So you can't necessarily pick and cherry pick which are the problem areas. You mentioned the Middle East a moment ago. I spent 4 years living in the Middle East, and I've just been to Iran and Egypt, Lebanon in the last 3 or 4 years. These are countries that are hurting in every way, but certainly democratically. Egypt, Lebanon has a kind of democracy, a phantom democracy, but it is hijacked by various factions, religion playing a huge part there. But here's the point I want to make. People in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, who have not had an election since 2005, 15 years ago, despite purporting to be democratic, they are inspired by a model, not necessarily the optimal model, but perhaps inspiration is a wrong word that will offend some people, but they see democracy in action every day next door on their television screens in Israel. Israel is an occupying force about whom they are deeply, to whom they feel great antipathy and everything else. But one of the reasons they want democracy is that they have been exposed to it every day in Israel, where they have 2 or 3 elections a year in a bad year. So people want democracy. Chinese on the mainland see what's happening in Taiwan, and they want democracy. One of the reasons they're snuffing out democracy in Hong Kong is the fear that it will be a virus that is a contagion in the mainland. So there is still that desire to look for models. The models can be flawed, as it is in America. People can still aspire for the process of democracy with all the good, the bad, and the ugly.
You mentioned America, and I want to pick up there with Lucan. There's a new team in the Oval Office now, Lucan, and well, they're different from the old team. The old team didn't seem to have too much of a problem with increasing authoritarianism in various parts of the world. I wonder whether you think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris intend to be more robust in their pursuit of a more liberal international order.
Well, it wouldn't be hard, given the fact that you had a president who actively embraced autocrats and favored them over democratic leaders. And I think there will definitely, especially in terms of rhetoric, be a shift in terms of actively trying to promote democracy in various countries. But there are clear limits. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff on Biden's plate, global warming, obviously COVID, that require him to work with autocrats. So I wouldn't be I wouldn't be too optimistic in terms of how far he's willing to go. But I do think this change in rhetoric, can have a huge impact on the margins.
Besma, how about you on that same question?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly we've seen a total change in rhetoric coming out of the White House. And I think Biden's going to be a more introverted president. I don't think you're going to get a lot, despite the rhetoric that we've seen already and some very good kind of signs to rejoin the multilateral framework. I don't think you're going to get a very active president. And frankly, I think, this is not a time to be talking about sort of fixing the world when they need to fix what's happening at home. The United States is broken. It's polarized. You have racial challenges all day, the inequity, economic disparities, talking about trying to find a new path forward for economic growth. I mean, there are so many challenges at home for Biden to fix. I just don't think they have the moral high ground to sort of be talking about trying to fix the world.
the Museveni government is set up differently than the Amin government is set up. The Amin government was a military dictatorship. Politics happened by decree. Everything was done from Kampala and handed down to the provinces in a very one-way manner. President Museveni's regime works differently. I take the point that, the increasing violence in public life reminds people of aspects of the 1970s. But nonetheless, President Museveni's regime is more answerable to the public will, considerably more answerable to the public will than Amin's had been. For Amin, the military itself held the answers, and it was up to government to implement the president's directives and for administrators in the provinces to follow the line that Amin gave. That's the way that politics worked in the 70s.
If you compare Museveni and Idi Amin, I would say the biggest difference is that whereas Idi Amin was a complete authoritarian or maybe dictator, Museveni is a dictator dressed in democratic clothes, right? So he has created institutions of the state, which Idi Amin did not have. But he has worked tirelessly to undermine these same institutions to ensure that no institutions gets power to become independent and hold him accountable. So this is the biggest difference between Amin's regime and Museveni's regime. The other difference is that whereas Idi Amin did many of the human rights violations in secret, many of the people that were killed or murdered under Idi Amin, we never came to know about them until later. The military in Uganda right now is willing to engage in this torture, in abduction, in kidnapping of Ugandans, and in most cases doing them during the day, and sometimes being recorded by even civilians. Many of these video clips of torture or abductions have been spreading all over internet. Part of it is because they are being recorded by individual civilians. Now, we should also admit that, yes, Museveni has created this image of himself as the father of the nation, of Uganda as a nation. Part of it is because he is such a big dominating figure in Ugandan politics, having captured power as a rebel leader and having spent 35 years in power, creating a huge patronage network that is able to preside over to rule the country.
Just to go back to what you said, Rita, you said that Canada is a small player, and I think the number is 50 million compared to the US's $1 billion. Does Canada need to take more responsibility towards where and how this aid is dispersed, even if, as you said, it's small?
I think there's a lot for Canada to think about in this. I think there's a lot for it to reconsider in terms of how it positions itself vis-a-vis the broader donor agenda of supporting democracy and human rights and supporting security and stability. Now, Canada has always said that its main purpose is to support democracy and human rights. If you go to their website on Canada-Uganda relations, they say we're supporting democracy and human rights and stability and security. Well, this election shows that it's hard to do the two at the same time. And this means that Canada will have to think carefully about other ways in which it can support democracy, not from a position of superiority, not from a position of saying what a country must do, but from a position of solidarity, from a position of supporting. And I think in that sense, Canada being a small country, a middle power, doesn't have that much influence in the world. But we are at the point in the world where democracy is in decline pretty much everywhere. And most countries have withdrawn from active democracy promotion. For a country like Canada, this is potentially an opportunity to seek ways of building alliances with other middle powers to find ways of, again, supporting democratic forces at home and abroad.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. and by viewers like you. Thank you.